here in the woods. And so often, bits of history kind of get overgrown by vegetation. So this site would have looked completely different almost 160 years ago when it was built at the end of 1863, when there was a tremendous fear in Cincinnati and in the Union forces that the Confederates, who were actually actively trying to send an army north to besiege and take the city of Cincinnati, potentially even ransom it for money. Cincinnati was the sixth largest city in the United States. It was this region, northern Kentucky and Cincinnati, was an industrial powerhouse. So many riverboats were being built here. So many items were being sent up and down the rivers, and if you could take this city, this region, if it could have been in Confederate hands, it would have opened up all kinds of resources to the Confederacy that they didn't have, and it also would have potentially gave them a much better position so that they could maybe have a treaty or some kind of ceasefire in their favor. The commanding officer of the Union forces in Cincinnati was a man named Lew Wallace. So when this notion of the siege was happening and they realized there was this real threat of invasion, the decision amongst the officers at the time was to build fortifications on these ridge tops all along northern Kentucky, cannon emplacements to potentially stop the Confederacy. They were going to have to fight through these rifle lines and these artillery batteries to get into Covington and to get into Newport and then cross the river and take Cincinnati. Right behind us is the Ohio River, and on the other side is a war road where supplies would have been brought up here. Now, the building of these these encampments and these sites was initially it was kind of a knee-jerk reaction. Hey, we've got to build fortifications. We need everybody we can. And one of the officers under Lew Wallace's command did something Lew didn't like, and a lot of people didn't like. He rounded up all the African Americans in Cincinnati, the roustabouts and other workers, and kind of forced them to come over and work building these encampments. When Lew found out, he put a stop to that, offered to pay them, and actually the next day, there were far more workers than there were the first day, and the Black Brigade, as we call them, helped build much of the fortifications along these rivers. And they would have been, and these hills, they would have been using things like this. This is a tool that we have in our collection that we believe was used to build one of these fortifications. I can't say if it was Bates or if it was Combs or any of there were a number of forts along the hill ridges, and this is one that we believe came out of one of those sites, but it's been in our collection like so many things for a long time. So it's hard to imagine how we changed the landscape and then how the landscape kind of comes back the way it was. And 160 years ago, this would have been different. It would have had cannons and rifle trenches and powder magazines. It would have been a different place entirely. But this site, though it may not look like much to the untrained eye, is one of the best preserved sites for the Civil War in northern Kentucky and in the Cincinnati region.